Hello and welcome to episode 45 of Let Them Eat Cake. My name is Jack. My co hosts are John and Ace. Today we are talking to two Singaporean activists involved in the LGBT movement in the country and actively working to counter the Christian far right within the country. We go into where these Christian groups get their money from, how they threaten the LGBT community there, and much more. But before that, let's get into some important headlines for everybody.
All right, so democracy updates. Recently, Russian elections kicked off on March 15th, closing on March 17th, resulting in Putin's overwhelming victory by 87% of the vote, which is the largest margin that he's ever won by, I believe. Fact check me. So there was protest votes that did happen. There's an infamous video of a woman pouring ink in a ballot box who immediately got arrested. People are writing in Navalny's name, but it's not really, I don't know. Efforts were kind of pointless. There's a lot of video, especially in occupied Ukraine, of people basically getting brought their ballots, if it's like an old lady, or being brought to the ballot box with like armed soldiers. It's like, wow, that sure is democratic. It's for their safety and protection. They're just helping them to protect them to vote. So obviously ramping up to the election, opponents were jailed. There was rumors that one guy might run or something, and then they said that he couldn't. Alexei Navalny died, and all of it just accumulated in Putin consolidating power, similar to how Xi Jinping did in China. And then there was also an ISIS attack in Russia. We'll get more back. We'll wrap back around to that and stick more in like some of the democracy stuff that's going on. Portugal, the center-right political party claims a minor victory in Portugal, but the candidate who's basically at the top of that coalition is pretty much representative of the far-right party. So a lot of people think that Portugal is going to have like this right-wing shift, but really the left has had it's just the left losing their absolute majority. They still have a majority kind of thing going on there. It's just the coalitions, because the far right, because this is how parliamentary governments form. They basically you can spread your shit out. It just matters what coalition does what. So you really need to be really good to get an absolute majority in some of these parliamentary states. And Portugal's left wing lost that. So who knows what exactly that will bring in Portugal, if they'll be stricter on immigration, which is also something that we'll get into. Or I know the guy, he has some weird views, like it's something around abortion or LGBT stuff. So I don't think it's going to be that different in Portugal, but we'll have to see. And then Senegal, if you've been watching our streams that we do Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we've talked about Senegal a lot. I think I might have even talked about them last recording, because we do these so infrequently it's hard to remember when I talked about it last. There's been an election crisis. I did talk about it last time, because I remember reading Macky Sall, right? So following up on that, they finally basically just were like, hey, it's happening. And the election is happening. Probably this will be out, and it's already have happened, because it's going to happen on the 24th. We'll see what happens there. But obviously, there was a lot of back and forth. The Constitutional Council got involved, and Macky Sall kept saying he's not trying to hold on to power and stuff. But what's important here is that it's in this region where we saw all these coups happen. Senegal is technically, like, still, even though it's not really a Sahel state, it still is one of those states. It like borders them. It's affected by that. So if things kept going downhill, who knows, maybe the little alliance that we'll get more into would have expanded a little bit. So that's where in Africa, and I mentioned in Niger, the ruling military junta has accused the United States of being condescending, and accusing the deal between Niger and the United States of being constitutionally illegal. Now, what kind of deal is that? What does this exactly mean? So basically, U.S. troops have a mission there. If you remember, there was Tonga, right?
Yeah, something like that.
In Niger, right?
I think it was, yeah.
So Tonga. This is a famous time. What it was is they were put there during the Obama admin. And this is reflective of Obama's policy, is that he believed that he could just drone strike and put specialists everywhere. So Trump continued that policy, because most of the time you do continue the predecessor's policy, especially in foreign policy. And so there has been a mission there. There has been a United States mission there. That's where this Tonga massacre happened. Not Tonga. I always think it's Tonga. It's Tonga. So that mission is basically what they're saying is constitutionally illegal. So there's been this kind of spat because obviously the United States doesn't like that the coups are happening, and you can say it's because their like imperialist power structure is dwindling, or whatever you want to LARP with. But this coincides with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso from forming a NATO-esque defensive cartel pact. It happened after you had ECOWAS, which we've talked about on the previous shows many times. This has been something we talk about for a few episodes now. ECOWAS basically said, we're going to invade you, which all things considered is just Nigeria saying that they're going to invade them. So they formed this defensive pact, and then they were saying that they were going to withdraw from ECOWAS. I think we even reported that they did withdraw, but it was just like a empty threat type thing, and immediately sanctions got dropped, and now they're still staying inside ECOWAS, which is, I think, kind of what I said at the beginning. I said, I don't think that they're gonna much is gonna really change. Obviously, Russia is more pro the opposition that came in these countries, and you can look back on previous episodes to get more into Africa, but that's just one of many crises that is causing displacement in Africa. The EU just agreed to a 7.4 billion euro aid package to Egypt. And then this is anticipation of massive immigration flood from Sudan because, as you should know, if you watch us, the Janjaweed and Sudanese military are fighting. And then obviously there's the situation in Gaza where people are going to flood into Egypt, and Egypt doesn't really have the means. I mean, Egypt's economy has collapsed, which is why this aid package is so important. Largely negotiated by Georgia Maloney, but this is we get in, this is the EEZ, Turkey, Greece, Egypt, Libya, the EEZ zones. This is a big thing that's always been going on there. But obviously Egypt and Libya basically drown people on the behalf of the European nations who are trying to escape their countries because of war or climate change or terrorism, things like that. And if the IDF does eventually push into Rafah, which is interesting because the United States gave a red line for once, and they're starting to show that they're serious about Rafah being a red line, which I'll get more into in a second. But the deal with Egypt basically is just to kill migrants, prevent migrants from coming to Europe. And then they also have Italy or Britain, they also have a thing with like Kenya or Rwanda. Well, they'll send migrants back to that location and stuff. So EU, human rights defenders, am I right? So staying in this area of the world, the United States and the European Union are now leading the charge for a lasting ceasefire in Gaza, some would say. Following the events like the Flower Massacre, Israel has slowly been leading support for their ongoing genocide in Gaza that's been masquerading as a special operation to oust Hamas militants. The easiest thing would have just been to let the aid trucks in. And that's the whole thing. When they started the aid drops with the vegetarian MREs that are totally halal, by the way, each of those cargo planes is like one truck of aid. Every drop is just like one truck of aid. So imagine if 30 trucks were able to get in. Just the fact that I'm sure, most people have heard that, it was in the State of the Union speech. You should know that the United States is building a dock and it's going to take a while for it to get there. But that's undercutting Israel. That's a really big deal. And then Gantz, the opposition. Now, I want to be clear, when we talk about opposition in Israel, it's just like Naftali Bennett. They might be better than Netanyahu, but the status quo is not going to change. The apartheid will not stop, no matter what, no matter who's backed. And the United States will always be complacent in this, just like how they were with South Africa. Another aspect of this is we might be able to chalk it up to the polls and how many primary elections actually came out just to do a protest vote. So we had legendary turnouts, record high turnouts in a lot of places, and they voted for uncommitted. And this might have put a lot of pressure on Biden. There's rumors that he was yelling at people after Michigan and things like that. So that might also have been part of the pressure to get across the message, but just everything culminating, I'm sure, has some effect. But one of those other big ones is not only, so Gantz, the opposition, he went behind Netanyahu's back, met with the United States and the UK, right? And when he got back, Netanyahu was like, there's only one prime minister of Israel. Like, how dare you do this? Blah, 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 blah. But it's funny because Netanyahu went behind Obama's back and started working with Republicans to oust Obama because of the Iran deal. So it's just funny coming from him of all people. Now, the other recent big thing. Chuck Schumer, who is the highest ranking Jewish member of the government, he came out and he had very harsh things to say. And I said that this is going to open up the door for a lot of other people to come forward. Now, AOC is officially in Congress calling it a genocide, even though people tried to frame it like she never said it beforehand, even though she did. But it's not doing it on a news interview in the floor of Congress, two different things. People who criticize her are so weird. It's like they think that she doesn't like Ukraine when she supported Ukraine. She also was the October massacre. She wasn't pro Hamas after that, even though they try to say that she was. And then also she was also calling out the atrocities in Gaza from the start. It's like, what more do you want from her? Netanyahu wants to finish what they started, aka kill all the Palestinians in Gaza. Because I don't know how effective. It's like people will say this about the Taliban. Like, we almost had them in 2004, but they lightened up and they were able to regrow. They're going to say the same thing about this. I don't know. We'll see what happens. We'll see if he invades Rafah or not. If he does, we'll see what the United States does. But either way, not good for the election. Am I right? What else do we have? Turkey. I mean, I did mention in Turkey and the EEZ. I mean, Turkey's in this region, right? They basically strengthened relations with Iraq, the government of Iraq. And I was saying, what is it actually going to change? And what it is actually is going to change is allegedly the Iraqi military might cooperate with Turkey to fight the PKK. And if we're talking Golden Division going out, that's one thing. But if we're talking about the PMF, yeah, if the PMF ends up helping, that's weird, considering what the PMF is. Anyway, they're moving up actions against the PKK and people, my context inside both Syria, and we're talking Idlib and the Kurdish side of things. Both of them think that a Turkish invasion is coming, and obviously the guys in Idlib don't really care about that. For them, that's a victory, because then they can just expand and have more territory, and backfill what Turkey does. Because obviously things aren't great between the two sides of northern Syria, or the north and south, as matter as that. But there's also obviously PKK's main base is in Iraq. Turkey has been doing these claw operations, where they go in and they've been bombing some of the tunnels. A lot of people in Ukraine actually have been not a lot, but I know many people who are now in Ukraine who were digging tunnels for the PKK not long ago, and they went back to, and then they went to Ukraine, and then they'll go back to they'll do an off season when winter hits in Ukraine. They'll go dig tunnels in Iraq that wait out the winter, basically. A lot of the people with anarchist collective stuff. So that's about it. Obviously, if the fact that it is in Kurdistan, and Kurdistan is even before the Iraq War, it was recognized as an autonomous state. So Iraq's military is not supposed to be able to go in there. That's part of the constitutional agreement with them, that it must be handed over to the Peshmerga. Now, that's where it gets interesting, because then it's what if then the Peshmerga end up having to be pushed to fight the PKK? Because there are factions of the Peshmerga that don't like them, because it's complicated. We don't want to get into it. There's two Iraqi Kurdistans, there's two Libyas, there's two Yemens, okay? There's three Somalias. What else do we have here? Hong Kong. Hong Kong has further tightened its security laws with the passing of Article 23 in a unanimous vote. Wow, crazy. Unanimous, you say. Adding dozens of new crimes with sentences as harsh as life imprisonment. The bill raises punishment for treason and broadens state secrets to include economic or scientific development within Hong Kong or mainland China. What does that mean, Jack? That's your cue. Go ahead, explain this law.
It's fucking gobbledygook. It just means that they can arrest you for fucking anything that they want. That's all it is.
It means that
literally publishing
if they
anything on
consider
the
your
economics
business,
of Hong Kong.
yes, if they consider your business to be treasonous, they can take down your entire business, basically.
Mm-hmm. And if you have a transitioning flight between, let's say you fly from America to Japan and you have a stopover in Hong Kong, and they don't like you. See you later. You're in jail for life. Haha, suck
Also,
it.
the scientific development. Obviously, like World Health
Yeah.
Organization, they have to share their results, right? So if
Mhm.
that isn't first audited by the CCP, treason now, basically.
Yeah.
This bill specifically targets treason, insurrection, sabotage, endangering national security as external interference in Hong Kong affairs. I don't know. It's just still gobbledygook to me because it's like, it's just like, what does this even mean?
It's literally means nothing. Like it's nothing. It's we made shit up so we can arrest anybody that we
10
want.
years of hatred. 10 years. If they accuse you of hating the CCP, you'll be jailed for 10 years. Epic. Another commie land country. Just kidding. There's protests in Cuba that's over food shortages. I don't know in how many years, but it's one of the biggest migrations of Cubans. Which people are worried about the Haiti migration. Which, by the way, we have a special on Haiti. If you want to learn more about Haiti, we just released. But people are like, oh, they never talk about the Cubans coming, right? Where they talk about these illegal immigration people because they know Cubans vote right wing. So you never hear anything about them being displaced. You never hear anything about floods of Cuban migrants, do you? You wouldn't know, you're not from here. So the government in Cuba it's just basically said, we see you, we hear you. This is what we're going to do. We're so transparent. This is literally what happened. And they could just be like, okay, we're just going to bow down and dissolve the government and then the US will lift sanctions. There is like a quick solution, but come on, let's be realistic about the situation. That's just being like, Hamas, surrender because Palestinians will stop dying. That's not how government works. I think everyone is of the opinion that the embargo is stupid, except for, I guess, the Republicans because they want to displace Cubans because they vote Republican, maybe. I don't know. How far into this do we want to get? The embargo is said to be largely to blame. At least that's what the Cuban government is blaming. But Obama wanted to relax the embargo. There's a great speech of him talking to actual Cubans. I think they're like first generation Cubans or they're kids. They're kids of first generation Cubans, but talking about what he's going to do and how the next admin has to pick up the ball. Well, obviously Trump didn't. He made it worse than ever. And basically Biden came in and didn't change anything because, as I said earlier, you tend not to change things from the foreign policy. And on a hilarious note, in the same kind of region, Bolsonaro, former president of Brazil, is facing jail time for lying about his COVID vaccine status. So when he did his little Jan 6th thing where they were going to occupy government buildings, it was very funny because basically the security department just let the people come in and then surrounded them and sieged them and arrested all of them. But Bolsonaro went to Florida at this time. They spotted him at a grocery store and all this stuff, and people were like, oh, he's in Florida because he thinks it doesn't implicate him for this coup type thing that he's doing. That was like another failed Jan 6 coup because he loves Trump. He's just like Trump. Except Bolsonaro, when he got stabbed, he bled. I think Trump would leak a goo. So yeah, he lied about his vaccination status, which is funny because if anyone has gotten like more COVID more times than Bolsonaro, I don't know if they exist. That man he's always in the hospital with a new case of COVID. He's gotten every variant. Then on top of that, he's also going to be, well, it says facing jail time. I think they recommended criminal charges to be specific. They might be going forward with them. And then there's also this is so funny because it's like Trump but stupider because he also has legal things from his bad presidency basically. The other thing is that not long ago he was riding a jet ski too close to a whale. So it's illegal to harass that whale. So he's also going to be doing he's going to also be going to court for harassing a whale as well, which is like a serious felony. And to finish up something very short, Bosnia and Herzegovina has moved forward to session negotiations on its path to EU membership. The EU has wanted the Western Balkans inside their union for a while, but only Croatia has advanced so far. This is a positive step forward for Bosnia and a marker to show that the country has advanced to a point where the EU is genuinely considering their candidacy right now. I've also heard rumors that Armenia has expressed interest in joining the EU. I
I heard
don't
the
know how
same.
serious that is being taken, but if it's really funny because they can't let Turkey in because they're just too big, right? It just screws up the EU. So if Armenia got let into the EU, but I think the Armenians are more if they're just pushing for it because they know Russia isn't going to keep them safe. So along with them moving closer to the US, they're also trying to move closer to the EU in whatever way they can. Armenia and NATO would be really funny too. That would be really funny. Anyway, let's talk about this terrorist attack in Russia. Terrorist attack. And the first thing you see is like the first reports were just a guy with a machine gun. Then we saw a pair of people, right? And that's like early, like the first 10 minutes I saw a pair and I'm like, this is ISIS. The mimetic type of terrorism, like the Christchurch shooting, doesn't happen in pairs. You know, when has a mimetic mass shooting happened in pairs? Ever? Columbine, that's the first one, you know? They started the trend. So,
I don't know. I've only seen the videos. I haven't looked much into it because I'm waiting.
I mean, well, it's just ISIS claimed responsibility.
Yeah,
A lot of people are like,
over
one,
100 dead.
yeah, why? Yeah, over 100 dead, and people were asking like, why is ISIS attacking Russia and stuff? And so the Khorasan division, aka
Mhm.
like the Pakistani Talibani division of
Yeah.
ISIS, they are from the Caucasus to Afghanistan. They're huge. So people from all those territories fall under the command of that. So this is a problem that really situates in Tajikistan. Some of well, we don't know specifically yet, but some of the guys we believe, you know, if we are to believe what Russian evidence says and who the arrests are, we'll see after a fair trial, maybe, that they're Tajik, a few of the guys, and the others were from basically a Caucasus republic. You know, the Caucasus all broadly want to be independent from Russia. It's not just Chechnya. Now, this is an issue with the Tajik government. They are extremely secular. The big terrorist group that was like, it was like the Haqqanis, al-qeada, and then the Uzbek movement, which was largely Tajik and Uzbek movement, right? So these were like three big groups when the war on terror started. And that Uzbek movement has largely become ISIS-K, which even encompasses the Uyghurs, right? Uyghurs are also in this group if Uyghurs go to ISIS. So some of these guys, like there's like, this started in Syria. So like these guys fought in Syria, they started in Syria, like it develops all through this Russian imperialism into Muslim territory. And ISIS is able to appeal to a lot of these people because, much like Al Qaeda, you know, they get results. So the United States warned Russia there was an attack. I remember people were like, "Oh, so obviously, how come the Americans are saying an attack is going to happen?" Russia said it was to delay their elections, to fuck with their elections and stuff. So they told all American citizens in the country to avoid crowds, large crowds, and then this attack takes place. It was a pretty insane attack. Not since there's the shooting in France way back in the day where it was
Mm.
gunmen opened up on the street in France,
Yes.
like and like like the emergency exits being locked in some of the places, like really, I'm sure. Oh, they still did have mags with ammo left too, because the gun must have broken, right?
Mm.
The way it was
Yeah, it
sparking and
looked like
stuff.
it, yeah.
So
Maybe
like
the gas tube exploded.
that's what I thought happened. It looked like there
Mm.
was a gas malfunction with how the gun was going. Um, but this is a serious ISIS attack, and it's funny because like ISWAP kills way more people weekly, but you never hear about them because they're in
Mhm.
Africa. You know, when it's white people who die, then we hear about it.
Of
But
course.
this is a problem really lies with Russia's treatment of its citizens in the Caucasus, and also former Soviet states and how they've treated their people that have led to these radicalization paths of these people. Much like how a lot of OG ISIS had a lot of English people in there because the English were just awful to the Pakistanis who were basically like coming into their country for a long time. There's a lot of Pakistani migration there. Anyway, um, I guess that's that.
Okay, so this one's going to be a little bit long-winded, but the context is necessary. So Boeing is one of America's biggest companies. They produce military equipment, obviously, but most people know them for their commercial jets. Recently, their commercial jets have been falling out of the sky, and overall, the quality of the jets has plummeted. Airbus, the commercial European competitor to Boeing and the only other commercial jet producer, released a more fuel efficient version of its plane, the A320, called the Neo. This caused a panic at Boeing, and they made a promise for something that they didn't have. They said that they would make a fuel efficient version of their 737, and they said it would fly the exact same as the old planes. This was one of their biggest mistakes. To ensure this, Boeing went to existing customers in an effort to undermine Airbus and to retain business, making these promises that they had no idea if they could keep. The planes would fly the same, thus not require any retraining, and they'd give them a nice little discount too on top of it. This was all to retain business from these airlines. I think American Airlines was one of the biggest ones. The sheer idea of losing money to the competitor because they hadn't upgraded their planes to be more fuel efficient seemingly drove the company insane to hold on to these promises. And because the plane behaved completely differently to the original 737 due to where the engine placement was, they looked around the company and found a neat little system called MCAS. They use it in fighter jets to right the planes after high speed maneuvers. It would automatically adjust the stabilizers at high speed. They wanted to apply this to commercial jets, and to incorporate this, they increased its potency to adjust for the speed differences, because obviously fighter jets are pulling these maneuvers at multiple, speed of sound, faster, twice the speed of sound sometimes. You don't need much adjustment there. So they made it more powerful. And it's a very important part to note. So come production and delivery of the 737 MAX jets in May of 2017, Boeing seemed to have everything nailed. Everyone was happy. The planes were flying. Come October 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 took off, and it was in a 737 MAX 8. It crashed into the sea 13 minutes later, killing 189 people on board. Boeing blamed the pilots. It turns out it was the MCAS system that I mentioned earlier, because it was roughly 4 times more powerful than any fighter jets. It was thrown off by an angle of attack sensor, which made it nosedive into the ocean. The key thing to note about the angle of attack sensor is it's the only sensor that it uses, and it can be disturbed by pretty much anything, any sort of disruption. So very,
Bird.
very cool. Yeah.
Planes hit
Um,
birds all day. Every day, planes are hitting birds.
Always. So yeah, very cool. Not even a year later, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed near, I can't say that, after just 6 minutes of flight time. Once again, the plane's MCAS system was triggered, causing a nosedive following the crash. The company once more blamed the pilots for the crash. So let's talk about them. The pilots, Yared Getachew, 29, had been flying for 9 years. Half of his flight time was on the 737. And the 2IC, the junior pilot, 25, recently passed the academy, the airline academy, and had almost 2/3 of his very limited flight time. I believe it was around 320 hours, which is not a ton, but 2/3 of it was on this plane. Um, uh, when they experienced the MCAS system malfunction, I guess you could call it, within two minutes of the takeoff, the plane went into an unrecoverable nosedive, impacting the ground and killing all 157 people on board, totaling 346 people killed by Boeing's cost-cutting solution to competition. When the black box for this flight was recovered, it revealed that the two pilots did everything that they were trained to do. They disengaged the MCAS, they took manual control, and they tried to right the plane. It also revealed that they were attempting to save the lives on board while it blared pull up at them until the very last second. And Boeing still had the nerve to blame them for this crash when it's their system that was defective and killed 350 people. The Ethiopian Airways flight prompted global grounding of the MAX planes.
So
Um,
specifically with this crash, right?
mm,
What happened is So it's not that they like slept on it at all. They immediately recognized that it was an error being due to MCAS, right?
Mhm,
Because it had just happened. They were like aware and trained for this eventuality. So when they override the MCAS and pulled up, and like you said, like this is takeoff, right?
mhm,
So on takeoff already, they were at a speed that was already too high going to the ground where it couldn't be recovered.
mm.
So even if like it automatically kicked off like right when MCAS triggered anything, just because MCAS triggered on takeoff, the plane crashed. There was no way to
Yeah.
recover it.
Mhm. Um, where are we? Okay, so, in 2021, so after these flights, after all of the groundings, Boeing eventually settled to pay 2.5 billion for fraud after investigations revealed they had intentionally hid the potential issues that they knew about of the MCAS system from the FAA, as well as working with the FAA to get it
Hit it from the
removed
pilots
from
too.
instruction manuals and hid it from the pilots, yes. All because they didn't want to retrain the pilots in simulators, and they got a nice little $1 million bonus on top because they were $1 million cheaper. So very cool. Um, with an additional 1.8 billion in damages to customers and half a billion in crash victim funds, the Max jet slowly returned to service, and once more everything seemed fine until 2024. Alaska Airways flight lost its door plug after the four bolts meant to be holding it in place were in fact never put in. The plane was only 2 months old at the time.
Can I just explain
This
what the door plug is real quick?
yes.
So in the fuselage, like they stamp them, they cut them out on the machinery that make the fuselage. So normally there is a door here on other models, but because this model didn't have a door there, they just engineered a plug for that. So it's just a panel that staples onto where the door should be that looks like a regular piece of the plane. You wouldn't notice the difference. And the four bolts that are supposed to secure it on just weren't there.
Yeah, so the plane was only 2 months old at the time of this incident. This also once more caused another round of airworthiness checks and further grounding of the Boeing fleet. There was also a whistleblower that came out called John Barnett. He came forward raising safety concerns within Boeing's manufacturing facilities. It came out that Boeing employees were unsure about their role in the safety and feared reprisal if they brought it up. The whistleblower was then found dead of apparent suicide, curiously. And finally, the most recent update for Boeing, a 737-800, a non-MAX aircraft, had a fuselage panel fly off in mid-flight, only realizing it after they had landed. It was also revealed that instead of spending money on planes and safety, Boeing spent company money on stock buybacks after they merged with McDonnell Douglas to artificially inflate their stock value. Between the two crashes that I mentioned before, instead of patching the issue like they said, they authorized $20 billion in stock buybacks, and then another plane crashed. So that's pretty cool. As I said, the FAA is also implicated on this. Regulation and safety checks for Boeing were done by people technically employed by the FAA, but they were paid by Boeing. So realistically, they're Boeing employees. They had zero oversight, and this was set up at a time to like limit uh, time spent between calling out for a quality check and time traveling to the manufacturing facility. So they would station someone in the actual facility. This was meant to be a shortcut in a way to streamline everything. It just turned into a way that Boeing could cheat the system and cut costs and get away with it until people died. Um, so yeah, this clearly had zero oversight. Um, Clearly, it's run wild and probably needs to be revoked and replaced with something that's maybe a civilian oversight committee. It's
Oh,
probably a
that's
bit
a
more
really good
reliable.
idea. The
Mm,
civilian oversight committee. But
like
just like,
that would be a way better idea.
lobbyists were for Boeing were involved with getting the government,
Oh, for
Congress to
sure.
vote on this FAA thing. But this East Palestine crash, right? The
Mm,
one of the things that they blame for the cause of that is because if they kept shortcutting the safety checks, right? Because they were like, oh, you can safety check those cars faster. Why? Because companies merged and shit, right?
mm,
And
yeah,
we were joking earlier that literally like China might have better airplanes and air safety than the United States at this point.
yeah. At least
They
Boeing.
grounded Boeing before America
They
did,
did,
before the
yeah.
FAA mandated the
Mhm.
groundings. So go China. China victorious
Mhm.
over USA.
China number 1. Singapore and
So
shit.
yeah, if you don't know, there's a uncut version on our Patreon that's been up for a few weeks now. There's going to be uncut versions going up to the Patreon. Basically, whenever they're done, I'll put them up there. And then because it takes us a while to get organized to write stories with streaming and stuff like that. I think this one is probably one of the most impactful. Like, you think, like, how much does Singapore impact me? The material and education in this one, and how much it relates to the US, and how this is completely tied into the problems inside our government as well, is going to, like, probably change how you look at the political landscape and how you look at American politics. Like, it will make you aware of things that you weren't aware of before.